And how do we make the case from the site level to the asset managers, speaking their language and actually letting them know when there's issues like the budget is unrealistic, we have these issues. How do we relate? How do we speak that language?
Pay less now or pay a lot more later. Nothing replaces actually going and talking to the maintenance supervisor and the team and understanding the issues they're facing and what you as an owner can do to minimize that cost going forward. And it will pay back, but it has to be explained in a way that they understand.
I think one of the things that vendors hate is just looking at or being just another number, in the Rolodex.
Every single person on that property understands what's going to be going on. If we want to get it right and we want to really be efficient and we want to be taken seriously and want to be acknowledged, everybody has to do their part. And I think that a lot of the times those other people and even us, I'll admit it, we miss it sometimes, right?
Yeah, the only thing certain about communication is the illusion that it's taken place.
Right. I had an age-old mentor that used to say all the time, inspect what you expect or you are going to get the unexpected every time.
The maintenance experience drives the revenue experience, right? And how
So, gentlemen, welcome back. Today we're talking about, we have Greg here joining, so we still have people joining. Back to what I was saying. So, Tyus, welcome, sir.
How's it going, guys?
Yeah, it's going okay. It's going okay. Welcome back. We're gonna kick it right off. I wanted to say the big topic is, right, how do we buy services, right? From scoping to vetting vendors to approvals, contract renewals. So how do we make better decisions and get the most for our buck? We have a couple of our friends and supporters of the council invited today. They might be joining later on, but for right now they're not on a call. If they happening to hop on a call, some of you know, some of you might not know. We have a couple that just joined like this week. But I do want to start by introducing Ken. He's our special guest for today, and Ken brings a unique operator perspective. He ran portfolios of tens of thousands of units. He's also an owner, an investor, and then I think that the conversation wouldn't be like a 360 if we wouldn't have someone like him at a virtual table. So welcome, Ken. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then since we're having you introduced, why don't you start with with the pain points and what do you see from a owner operator's perspective, high level?
Hello, everybody. I'm Ken Doble. I've been doing it, I guess, 30 years now. Been involved with over 30,000 units. At one point, I had a portfolio of 23,000 units. I had 700 direct employees. We had development, high rise, and all that. That was before 2008. That blew up. Started a company called QR Capital. Bought and sold about 9,300 units over the last 15 years. And I'm a value add guy. We buy properties, renovate them. And I built, 3 property management companies from scratch. I don't have a currently.
Business.
Yeah, I currently don't have a management company. We actually are using Campus Advantage as our current management company for our current portfolio. So anyway, yeah, this is an interesting topic. It's definitely a pain point. Buying services, procurement, trying to figure out what the right pricing for things. You're also right in the middle of annual budgeting, Adrian, as well.
Oh, yeah.
And I know there's a big, push to try to go get bids on everything and try to figure out what the right costs are and how to bring the cost in. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic.
We have a couple of our friends and supporters. They just joined. Jeremy, you're up next, sir. Why don't you introduce yourselves to the group? Say a few words about yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Adrian. Jeremy Cohen, Director of Real Estate Partnerships here at Switch. We're an EV charging solutions company. So a lot of what I do is I oversee national partnerships for developers and owners and operators just like yourself to help them with their EV charging solution across their portfolio. No two buildings are alike, no two portfolios alike, different asset classes, different needs, you name it. Before I was in EV charging, I too was on the real estate side, working in architecture and also for a third-party property management firm doing acquisitions. So I'm very familiar with the world that everyone operates in here and a lot of the pains and the challenges. But happy to be an EV charging resource to any of those throughout your portfolio, and happy to be here and just contribute to the conversation as well. So thank you.
Welcome. Greg, you're up next.
Oh, hey, I'm just hanging out. I'm with Jeremy. I'm also from Switch. I'm the head of marketing, and yeah, generally, I'm really excited to just be part of this group. Adrian's been awesome to include us in this, and so yeah, we're here to listen and be a support. But otherwise, yeah, just wanted to say hi.
I want to turn this back to you, Ken, and just kind of like start with the top pain points that you see in a process of purchasing for you as an owner currently. What are the pain points that you're experiencing, the worst ones?
Well, I think you got to break it down by actual areas. For example, there's services. That's one issue. So turnkeys, it could be security providers, it could be what other type of providers we have on the site, and then there's actual supplies and cost. And when we look at those, typically as at the ownership level and the asset management level, we go through this process where we do the bidding and we look at the prior year's budget. And of course, we're trying to clean up anything that was a one-time thing. And then we're trying to figure out, hey, how can we drive that cost down? Because obviously, at the end of the day, we're all about trying to reduce the cost and increase the NOI. And the issue we get into is this internal conflict between preventive maintenance at the maintenance level, because they know that, if we repair this thing and we take care of the HVAC, or we stop the mold leak before it becomes a major issue, there's this constant struggle between it. Now, I know most management companies have these policies and procedures where they're supposed to walk every quarter, supposed to document everything, and change the filters and do all the preventive maintenance stuff. But we also know that if you have a spike in turn, especially during work orders, so like, for example, it gets really hot outside or it gets really cold, and the maintenance team is pulled in 20 different directions, it's very hard for them to stay on top of all the stuff. Yet the expectation level is still there that they have to do it. And what I call this, yeah, what I call this is the gap between, I call it the management gap. It's what corporation, I'm sitting here in my office saying, yeah, they're doing it right. And then what's actually happening at the site level, there's a big gap, and you can usually drive a semi truck through it. And that's a pain point that's real. And you don't know that it's real unless you go visit the property and talk to the team. And it fluctuates. There are periods where it slows down. Like student housing is a total different curve than a regular conventional apartment. So those are the kind of things that I see. And then, of course, you can dig deeper and we can peel back the layers and start talking about where we're being overcharged. And we can go much more narrow into it, but I don't want to hog this conversation, so I want to open it up to the group. And those are just my high level thoughts on this when I break it down into categories and I'm thinking about it. And I always tell the maintenance supervisors, I'm your best friend. My goal is to try to make your job easier and try to, the capital issues. That's one of the worst things in the world, where you have unrealistic ownership groups, that you have this deferred capital. It's not been addressed. And the maintenance guys having to take the brunt of it. And they're the ones getting yelled at. So is the manager, in fairness to them, and the regional and everybody else. And it's the ownership's fault that it's happening, because they didn't properly budget or allocate for it. Anyway, I can go on a rant, so I'll stop.
Yeah, some great points out there, Ken. And you're a hands-on owner, right? You walk your properties, you're very involved. A lot of the groups, from what I've seen over 20 years, is that they're raising money, they invest, and they don't want to they want to do just the minimum involvement, right? Maybe like do a quarterly inspection, send an asset manager, which in reality, that asset manager does not have like facilities maintenance background, right? So they're not getting too deep into structural stuff, preventative maintenance and stuff. And they basically guided by property manager that takes them to the best looking units that they prep for the past week to look perfect, and everything looks rosy, right? But when it comes down to like numbers, like you said, one of the areas is like budgets aren't realistic, so you can't really pull rabbits out of the hat when you're managing. Like, you could only do so much with it, and so there's a big disconnect out there. And I think it's also a lack of understanding what it really takes to run an asset if you have never done it. For you, luckily, you also have been an operator, so that's incredible, right? Because you also have that type of background, so you do understand, but most groups don't. So I want to ask another question before I go around the table. I'm really curious, for us, how do we speak asset management language, and how do we make the case from the site level to the asset managers, speaking their language and actually letting them know when there's issues like the budget, it's unrealistic, we have these issues. How do we relate? How do we speak that language It's not so much about like what we say, but how we articulate.
Absolutely. I definitely understand the issue because there's a big pressure to try to reduce the operating cost, and we all feel it and we all know it. I think it's one of education. And I think what you can say when someone comes out, you have to have your numbers tight. You have to show that you've done your work. A lot of times you'll show up and they haven't really dug into the issue or don't truly understand it. They know it's a problem, but they haven't gotten the bids. They haven't anticipated what the issues are. So let me give you an example. Let's take this terrible HVAC thing that's going on. We all know these older properties have these old ACs and they've been duct taped, and I don't know what version are we on now?
Mhm.
Adrian. So here's what happens. You buy a property that was built in the 80s and it's gone through multiple cycles of replacements, and we have these old ACs. And by the way, I've seen the cost go from $3,400 to $8,900 to replace these things. So the cost has just continued to go up. So when we buy them, when you're putting your performance together and you're looking at buying these deals, obviously during due diligence, you look and say, how many of these do we have? And then, of course, you look at the historical and say, oh, well, they had this much. We'll just budget this for AC. Well, we have an really hot period. We're going to have a lot of them fail. And also, if the preventive maintenance was bad in the past, there could be even more issues.
Yep.
So if you're a supervisor and you know this issue is coming, and you can say, look, here's what we're dealing with. Here's the issues, and here's how I propose we fix it. And here's a plan. And you have to come back to them in numbers and say, here, by the way, it has to be realistic. If the property has no budget for it, you can explain it to them and say, here's where we are, and here's what's going to happen, and here will be the upset residents, and here's how we can potentially bridge the gap. But I think most owners, they definitely understand financials and numbers. And the idea is, how do you got to tie it back to their bottom line. The bottom line, of course, is having an upset resident who doesn't renew, which increases your turnover cost. So one of the factors that maintenance has an incredible impact on is turnover, that controllable turnover. And I've written about this controllable part before. So that's a big part of this as well. But I do believe that getting multiple bids, explaining it in a easy to understand language to them, and how, you can pay, more, pay less now or pay a lot more later. And that's a time value analysis. We call that IRR, cash on cash. We do these net present value analysis on deals when we're looking at this. But I think educating an owner or an asset manager on those issues, and we can't assume, most of the asset managers I know did not come from construction or maintenance. They were finance guys. Some of them were property managers, but a lot of them that I've met are finance guys, and they live and die by spreadsheets. And I know I'm a recovering spreadsheet addict. So I understand that whole mindset of looking at the numbers and understanding what's driving it. But nothing replaces actually going and talking to the maintenance supervisor and the team and understanding the issues they're facing and what you as an owner can do to minimize that cost going forward. And it will pay back, but it has to be explained in a way that they understand. I don't know if that's long-winded, but I don't know if that helped or not.
Let's find out. Dwayne, do you want to weigh in, sir? Next.
Sure. Yeah. So a couple of things. First thing that I heard you mention was NOI. The other one that I think we all too often forget about is ROI. Can you show an ROI that makes sense? Right. And if you can show that return on that investment, LED, energy conservation has been a big push for the last 5 to 6 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great opportunities for ROI. Sometimes the net operating income, we get locked onto that. And how is this going to affect our net operating income? Some of the other things that we seem to forget about when we start talking about, costs associated. HVAC is a perfect example that he brought up. There's also compliance things that push the envelope that have to be done, have to be met. But, most asset managers, when we started talking to them a year and a half ago about the new EPA guidelines and changes coming up, they were clueless. They just had no idea and were clueless of what we were talking about or what that meant to the bottom line. And yeah, you're right. Some didn't care. They still didn't do anything. They still didn't budget for it. And now those properties are struggling. Another thing that I find that is sometimes makes everything a little bit more difficult for on-site teams is whether they're a owner managed property or a third party managed property. Okay. You get into third party management, and like the gentleman was saying, sometimes your owners aren't even coming out onto these properties. It's only their asset managers. Well, if it's a third party, your asset manager's coming out and they're talking to a regional manager or somebody that's working for a third party management company, that a good portion of their fees are predicated on meeting budget and making their bonuses, right? So there's that other layer that plays into a lot of this. I have found the ones where I'm most successful is, as the gentleman said, I have my three bids. I've already gone through the bids and I've made certain they're apples to apples, oranges to oranges. I've tried to think of every question the asset manager or the regional may ask and have that answer in advance, so that when I sit down and I talk about it, I can have that conversation and come off as if I know what I'm talking about. And the less questions that you're able to answer when they start questioning your bids, the less potential or opportunity that you're going to have for them to agree to spend that 50, 60, 70,000, and sometimes in cases of hundreds of thousands of dollars for these bids. So, I always look at it, scope of work. Once I have my scope of work, and I get my bids, then I look at net, NOI and ROI. And then I try to lay that all out in a time and label and process of what it's going to cost, what it's going to recover, what the long-term benefit. Then I immediately go into the customer service side of it. What are we offering our residents that makes it an upsell or a potential benefit to the resident, and that's going to drive retention higher and keep occupancy at a peak. That's my 2 cents.
So from a high level perspective, I wanted to ask, what do you see like the biggest pain points for you and the biggest opportunities when it comes to like purchasing those services, getting the best for your buck? And I want to stay with the two lines that kind of like can open. One of them being the one for like services, and the other one being the MRO, the supplies. So I want to just kind of like take these two different lines.
So the services, so most of the management companies and ownership groups now, you're kind of hand tied, because you have to go with vendors that are already either been vetted through Compliance Depot or through Vendor Cafe or one of these, for obvious reasons, making certain licenses, insurances, and all that are up to par, right? But so like, I'll give you an example, and I battle this quite frequently. Painting contractors and housekeepers. You could be so much more competitive in pricing for that if you could go to the smaller companies that are local to the markets, but all too often they can't afford to, nor do they care to carry the assurance requirements that are being requested from the ownership groups or from your management company. So therefore, they're having to do the work as a third party through a larger vendor, a First Service, a Superior Builder Group, Carry Services in Orlando, any one of those. So now you got a middleman in it. So of course your expenses are going up even more so. So it starts with vendor selection and credentialing of them, and then obviously from there you can start to select the vendors that you're going to have to bid on it. But I've found the whole compliance part has really kind of tied hands and has made the resources less available, which then, of course, supply and demand, that also cuts into your flexibility as far as pricing.
Great insights here. I want to go on the other side of the table and see if Jeremy has some thoughts from the other side of the table, right? Being the person that's trying to like sell to multifamily and see some challenges out there, opportunities, and maybe opportunities to kind of like work with management together. just be a better partner or educate them to be a better partner for you?
Yeah, I think one of the best parts of the relationship is having the open dialogue. So I would say, having played both sides of the fence, I think being completely open about budgeting is very big. Like right now, like Ken was saying, everyone's going through the budgeting process. So a lot of the quotes maybe that my team is sending out is just so operations is looking at it, having a better understanding. But it's also understanding too, like managing expectations. If you're getting multiple bids and some of the vendors who have been at this the longest, maybe the 800-pound gorillas are always going to be the most expensive, but it's also been one of those, well, we know brand recognition and it's never failed us. Not a bad move to also look at some of the smaller guys who are also, eager to earn business, eager to drop their costs, and also eager to form those partnerships. So, I would say just it is never hurtful to just have the line of communication with the vendors and treat them as partners and not necessarily always as vendors. I think one of the things that vendors hate is just looking at or being just another number, in the Rolodex. But I think, from the asset management side, if you have 3 or 4 bids that you always need to get, keep those lines of communication open and just be transparent, with those vendors or partners. They appreciate it. And of course, they want to earn your business too. So, I would say give the little guys a shot. You don't always have to go to the 800-pound gorillas, but just be transparent. I think that's just good for business and, just a partnership level.
Yeah, so part of creating this platform here, Jeremy, is to bring the other side of the other side of the business at the table, right?
Mhm.
Just so we could change the conversation. So it's not always operators looking down at vendors and only hitting them for like sponsorships when there's an event coming up. Just actually see that they're real people just like us. We could build great partnerships, and this could be like mutually beneficial, right? It doesn't have to be like different levels of citizenship in an industry, right? One is like the lower tier, and then we're like out here because we have we write the checks. So that's great. That's great feedback out there. I'm gonna cross the border right now. I want to go to Jonathan, and then after Jonathan, we'll come back to Noah and hear Noah's thoughts. Jonathan, you have the floor, sir.
Hi there, everybody. Hearing lots of good points, and I truly feel for those that are constrained by a limited number of predetermined vendors. That seems absolutely terrible to me. One of the things that we enjoy most is meeting directly with any of our service providers, getting a feel for them, especially with the fire prevention stuff that we do, like keeping close tabs and that close relationship with the vendors allows us to track the bad actors within that particular field and catch them before they end up back on our sites under a different company, for example. So while I can see that there's some advantages to go with the devil with these larger companies, the more consolidated they become, the more expensive it's going to be. And at some point, that familiarity is going to cost us too dearly, and we're going to have to look for smaller vendors anyway.
Is that always the case, Jonathan? I mean, can we find like larger companies that could handle higher volumes that aren't really that way?
Yeah, in some cases, I mean, we've noticed that with, some of our trusted general contractors that are handling larger projects are able to do it, and it's well worth the extra money to just kind of leave it all in their hands. But when it comes to specialized ongoing, I feel that having that direct communication with the contractors, being able to vet them personally, lets you know that you're not just dealing with a salesperson, you're dealing with an actual operator who's going to take care of your buildings and answer your questions.
I feel that you have probably like a recent not so great experience with the fire inspectors and with a vendor that does that. In your opinion, like now looking back and lessons learned, what can you have maybe done better to prepare, or what like type of things you learn from the next time around you do the next inspections. You're not gonna have like as many surprises. I could wait in on that, but I like to hear like your thoughts on that, because I had similar experiences over the years.
Trust is overrated is the lesson that we learned. It's built on verification, right? So if you're not getting out there to check on their work and follow up, at some point the trust is going to slip. They're going to start charging more for less, and you're going to get a bad product. So again, it comes down to that maintaining that relationship, maintaining a layer of scrutiny that allows you to, let them know, hey, you're paying attention to what they're doing. You're paying attention to the results. That gets you the better deal, and ultimately doesn't result in those very awful incidences where contractors are screwing over your buildings and your tenants. It's not a good look.
I had an age-old mentor that used to say all the time, inspect what you expect, or you are going to get the unexpected every time. And I live by that with my contractors and my employees, or peers. I tell them all the time, man, contractor is no different than an employee. The people that are coming out to do the work on your site, they're not the owners of that company. So if you're not out there inspecting what you expect out of them and then reporting back to the owner what you're not getting that you expect, you're going to get the unexpected every time. And if you wait, it's going to be a lot costlier in the end.
One of our owners, Van Colius, used to say something very similar with some frequency. People do what is inspected, not what is expected.
Absolutely. That's right.
Great reminder, gentlemen. Noah, you're up next.
Oh, thank you, Adrian. Well, this is good timing, because I've actually been writing an email on the side while listening to what everybody has to say to one of our regional managers to address some issues with our procurement process. So the timing is quite surprisingly good. So we run into this issue a lot with just getting apples to apples proposals, with how, and I feel like I constantly am saying, well, in the affordable world, this is the issue. And especially when you're dealing with rural properties in the middle of nowhere in Illinois or Michigan, where it's really hard to find those large companies that you can trust on to give you consistent proposals with broken down bid items and line item costs and all of that stuff. A lot of the time when I get proposals for review, it's we're replacing this window for $7,000, and no line items, no breakdown, no explanation of what they're doing to protect the property, what's going to be removed, what's being replaced, what's the trim going to look like. None of that information is included. And then on the other hand, we might get a proposal that's got every single small task involved in the project that's broken down, and still might not have line item costs, but at least I have an idea of what the scope of work is. So it's for us, it's a matter of, one, making sure that our staff understand what we're looking for, first of all. Two, making sure that they're really understanding how we want them to break down the proposals and compare them to apples. In my opinion, folks should be able to look at a scope of work, if it's broken down by task, and say, oh, hey, I may not know what this means, but I see that this was mentioned on one proposal where it wasn't mentioned on another. Let me ask about that and get clarification before I send it up and ask for somebody to put together a vendor contract for us to actually get signed. We want our staff to really get into the habit of understanding, at the very least, the differences between these proposals. Even if they don't understand what's actually being done, we want to see them break it down and at least try to figure that out so that they can get ahead of it and make sure that by the time it comes up to myself or our regional maintenance managers or regional community managers, that we're just really looking to make sure that the scopes are accurate for what we expect to need to be done, and not that we're going back and forth between the manager and asking them to clarify with the contractor what's going on here, what's going on there, is this included, how much is it going to be if it's not, and trying to get the process a little bit more streamlined in that regard. When it comes to vetting our vendors and actually determining whether they're worthy of keeping around, whether it's somebody that we want to try to give more business to, that's even more of a struggle for me because it all really depends on what I'm hearing back from our managers. Some of our larger vendors that we use at more properties, I'll hear from one property manager how amazing that company is and how much they love them and how much they don't want to use anybody else. And then I can hear from another manager 20 minutes down the road how horrible that same vendor is, that they never get any updates and they never know when they're coming back or any of those other things. So it's really hard to gauge what's accurate and what's really, oh, well, did you communicate to that vendor that you're only on site on these 2 days specifically, and the other 3 days of the week you're at that other property that's half an hour away with a different phone number? No, you didn't? Oh, well, that might explain why you're having a hard time communicating with them. It's one of those things where, we want to start. I've personally been working on bringing in larger vendors to try and consolidate things, make it easier for our property managers to know who to call, who they can rely on, what they can expect in terms of pricing, and just try to take the guesswork out of the process for them as much as possible. Again, with us having such remote properties, I feel like we scramble a lot to try and find vendors where it's like, oh, well, the large plumbing company that most other properties are going to call, they're not going to drive 2.5 hours outside of the city to get to this property. So we had to find a small mom and pop. But that small mom and pop doesn't carry workman's comp, which we require. So we have to make sure that we're not only finding reliable vendors, but that they have the proper coverage. And we have to rely on our property staff to actually confirm that they have that coverage when it's an emergency situation. We use Yardi Vendor Cafe to do our insurance compliance, but we discovered that folks were finding ways around that when they had emergencies and would rather just get the work done rather than make sure that they had the insurance. Usually that doesn't come back to bite us, but something that our COO mentioned to our VPs a couple of months ago is that any of these companies that come onto our sites without workers' comp, we end up having to pay for them, back pay for them to have that coverage for whatever period of time they were on the property, because our insurance wants it regardless of whether they carry it or not. So things like that tend to, even more muddy the process. And that's why I try to say, I tell everybody, make sure that you have these vendors lined up for those emergencies. You shouldn't be scrambling to find an electrician at 2:00 in the morning when your property got struck by lightning and it blew out the transformer. You shouldn't be scrambling to find a plumber on a Friday evening at 5:30 when someone's water heater pops. You should be ready for those folks you should have those kinds of companies lined up and ready to go so that there's no question of what you're going to do if you run into one of those situations. I got an incident response management program set up for our properties earlier this year with a group called Firm. And the reason that I love that is because now I know that when we have a fire or a unit getting a lot of water damage from either failed piping, water heaters, roofing leaks, or any other kind of water intrusion, biohazard, anything like that, all I have to do is say to our managers, call Firm. They'll get one of the assigned restoration vendors out to your property within 2 hours. And then, this is a situation where we're obviously going to be opening up an insurance claim. So we're just going to follow their recommendations. We worked very hard at the beginning to make sure that Firm and their restoration vendors that they're assigning to our properties understand what we expect, and also some of the constraints that we have to work with when it comes to affordable properties again. And our renters, we're not allowed to require renter's insurance, which means our renters don't have hotel coverage most of the time if they're displaced from their units. They don't have coverage for their personal belongings. So there's a lot more that goes into it, where we need to make sure that we're ready to, if hopefully we can transfer that resident to another unit on the property. Otherwise, we're paying to put them in a hotel. And then we need Firm and their restoration vendor on that property to make sure to minimize the downtime as much as possible. So now I know that I have an industry expert that's reviewing all of the work by these actual restoration vendors to make sure that it's in compliance with the industry standards, and also that I can trust that they're not going overboard like some of these other restoration companies. I'm not going to name names, but there are some companies out there that know when your managers don't know what they're looking at and will absolutely take advantage. So I can now rely on the fact that we have contracted pricing, we have very clear guidelines for our restoration vendors, and they're only doing what's absolutely necessary. Now, educating our staff and our regionals to understand why it's necessary, that's a different conversation, but at least now I know I can rely on, I have a handful, 3, 4 restoration companies that I can rely on to actually handle these situations, and we're not calling those folks that are going to gut the entire unit when all that happened was a quarter of the apartment got wet from a leaking pipe. So
Do you find this outsourcing to that particular one-stop shop helpful to you?
absolutely, yeah, we've seen significant reductions in downtime of the units. I mean, we went from 2+ weeks on a simple water damage call to an average of about 10 days of downtime, at least for the restoration work, not including the build back. But we're seeing pretty significant savings with the negotiated pricing and the specific, like there are guidelines on how many days out of a week can the restoration vendor charge for dry down equipment and fans and all of that kind of stuff. So we're seeing about a 30% savings on those kinds of projects, and we're seeing the units get ready faster, and we're getting better documentation for when we're submitting the stuff to insurance to actually get it covered. So it's, in general, aside from a few challenge projects here and there, everything's moving a lot faster, a lot more smoothly, and there's a lot more transparency into the process, which I personally love.
Thank you for sharing. This is very valuable. I want to also synthesize the two pain points that you mentioned during your intervention here. One of them was how we teach our site level employees to like understand the scope and do better when it comes to that. So if any of you here like have suggestions, it'll be great to bring them up, when it's your turn to kind of like share, because at the end of the day, it's not just about pointing at, pain, but also finding solutions. And the purpose of this group is to kind of like become the think tank, the place where we brainstorm and we come up with the best practices here. So that was one of them. And you had another one pain point out there, the difficulty of like expanding the vendor pool, right? You just kind of stuck with a limited number of vendors due to insurance. So if any of you have like any feedback about how you overcame that, I encourage you to share right during this conversation. It'll be very helpful. Tyus, you're up next. The voice of the site. Tyus is not. Am I right, Tyus? Right?
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
currently just site level.
I mean, so right now they have me run, or not have me. I've just kind of offered it. I have 5 under my portfolio.
Okay.
And so I'm helping all over the place. And in doing that, like at the start of the month, we had almost no move outs, move ins, anything like that. But in that time, somehow we just had a mess of people just turn in their keys and be done. For really just there's better options around. There's newer properties. They're brand new builds. There's 6 in within 10 minutes of mine, and we're being looked at, scrutinized as if we're not keeping up on everything. And now we're having to go through and be up on top of our P's and Q's, even though we have like a 96 as far as work order completion and on time done, and a 96%, and then a 70% for the make ready turns and all that. We still have like 16 units vacant at a 160 unit property. That's a lot. And so that they cut that down, they get stricter on us, and then they cut our budget down, tell us no overtime, and it's been a lot. And trying to actually like just handle it all, deal with it all. And then I still have, I'm developing standard operating procedures for 2 of the other properties to help them out. It's a lot of green guys out here that just because people left for one specific job instead of this all around encompassing thing that you just have to handle, which is understandable. But I mean, this is what I love to do. And it's just, how do I communicate that up that that's not the solution to just, yeah. be cracked down on us for doing the best we can.
Yeah, it's you're in a tough situation. I've been there, I've done that. Any advice here for Tyus and encouragement will be, will go a long way, I'm sure. Uh, Crossing the border back up north, G, what do you have to share with us here on the topic?
I mean, I think it's interesting. Like from a vendor perspective, I mean, I guess two things that was mentioned earlier by Jeremy. Like, it's important that we come to conversation as a partner, right? Like, when we show up and we're selling all the time, it's kind of annoying. I mean, it's even annoying for everybody on the call here. It's annoying for us, and it impacts the relationship right through to even contracting, right? Now, I'm really, I get frustrated when we're talking to folks in the site, like Tyus as an example, and we have our cold calls and we do all the stuff and we listen to them. I find it really interesting, just with respect to the vendor procurement perspective, is that while the problems reside at site, but the ability to solve the problems are often deflected to offsite. And so, like we hear all the time, hey, we speed up maintenance, whatever, inspections, make it better, faster, cheaper, that kind of thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, I am suffering through that. I'm in the firefight. I'm leaking oil, but I don't make that decision. Like, what do you then you kind of like dig into, what do you do about it? Well, we don't. We just keep grinding it out, keep grinding it out. And so I'm always interested in terms of like the buying authority or even like the ability to think about new ways of solving the problem. Because like we all can agree here that like the talent problem is not going to solve itself in our career lifetime. And so like if we go with the assumption that talent's not going to solve the problem, quality is going to get worse, costs are going to go up, rent's going to stay the same. Those are kind of like things that are like, that's applehood and mother apple pie motherhood right now. What are we going to do that's different? And then who's going to drive it? Because that's the part that I kind of get like, I was really frustrated about it last week. It's like people are like the data on the resident experience is the maintenance experience drives the revenue experience, right? And it like who is willing to listen to that from your perspectives? Because like I can tell you that, but I'm a seller, so I'm just annoying and probably lying. But like when you guys are able to say it and escalate that to your leadership, saying, "Hey, like to your point, Matthias, like I thought your data is awesome. Like, hey, we've got 116 units. We've got basically 15% available, and we're being cut down to do all the things that retain residents." It's like, should we be surprised that it's going to be 20 units that are reopen in a month and a half? Like we're coming in December here. If they're open, they're not leasing until February. So you're staring down 3 months of vacancy for those two units, probably a few more that have come on into the turn bucket. And like, it's kind of like, sorry, and I'm ranting. I'm not answering the question around how vendors relate, but like, I don't mind the vendor procurement pieces. I don't mind the relationships, but like, I'm trying to figure out how do those that have the problem don't have authority to solve it. And what most interesting is those that have the problem aren't even interested to hear about how it might be solved. And that's the part that I think is I wish could emerge. Like I realize I can't shift budget authority, but even the willingness to solve the problem, because it's like as a site person, I'm either going to solve it, or get out or quit. But it's not, that doesn't need to be the way. There are different ways of doing it. And why I'm here in this meeting today, and other vendors too, is that we're trying to figure out how can we begin to mobilize around that so that we can support you as partners and not sellers, because otherwise we're just going to go over your head and find the people that are fiscally accountable for the outcome. And then you get stuff put onto you, which it's never been successful in my life. There's a rant, a lot of things are covered off there. But like, how do we get the site level teams to kind of be interested in hearing new ways of solving problems so that vendors can have that conversation, and then we can ultimately go through the compliance, the preferred vendor list, all that stuff too.
I'd love to get Ken's take on this right here, because
Yeah, you see you laughing, Ken.
He represents that other, like that other layer,
Well,
the decision layer somehow, right?
Yeah, I've got so many notes from this conversation. There's obviously a lot of pros here, and I appreciate everybody's input on this stuff. And I could really go in different things, but I'll address the first question. The property that's struggling right now, guys, there are a lot of ownership groups that have bad debt structures, and they are really struggling. And the reason I know this is I'm actually seeing a lot of them, the lenders are selling their notes at extreme discounts. And when you have a property that's struggling and you're trying to make sure your cash flow, I call it the death spiral. And it's a terrible thing to experience at the site level. It's even worse to experience it at the ownership level because at that point you're worried about making payroll. So you start becoming desperate and you start trying to squeeze it as hard as you can, as fast as you can. And your pleas for preventive maintenance will go to deaf ears. They will start cannibalizing units. We've seen this cycle before, and I'm not suggesting that's actually what's happening there. I'm just saying I'm seeing this across the board right now on anything that was purchased in 21 to 23 in that range in there. A lot of those properties were purchased. They were purchased at the peak of the market. They were on low floaters. Interest rates have gone up and the owners are struggling. The asset managers are struggling. The management companies are struggling. And I think one of your participants, they brought up this difference between third-party managers versus owner managed. And I always tell people I would way rather work for an owner manager because you could get directly to the people that have the budget authority, which is what he was talking about a minute ago. And having that budget authority and being able to say, here's the issue, here's how we fix it, and here's what we can do about it. But when you get to the situation where a deal is struggling and it doesn't have any reserves, like there's only a couple of times. Earlier, someone talked about ROI. ROI comes in when you're doing value add stuff. So his example was LED, and he's right. If you do a retrofit or something like that, there's actually a return on your investment. HVAC, it's hard to quantify, or a leaky roof. Well, you could say, well, there's a return because if we didn't fix it, the person wouldn't be there. That's possible, but it's just a base level. To maintain the asset, you have to spend these costs. So it's not necessarily I'm looking at my spreadsheet and I say, wow, I've got to replace an AC. I get extra rent for that. No, I don't. That's expected. I have to do that to keep people there. So there's definitely a distinction there. And I think the other point someone made was about the incentive structures for the management companies. I will say this, working with several management companies and having my own at one point, the incentive level percentage wise is very small. So maybe they get 25 basis points, 50 basis points if they hit their NOI. And that's just, I'm not saying that that doesn't motivate them. I think the bigger motivation is they want to please the ownership group. They do not want to have anybody yell at them and come down on them. And I think someone else mentioned the dog and pony show. I've been witness to many of that. And what I like to do is get the rent roll and say, no, I don't want to look at those units. I want to look at the other units. And I think that some other people were talking about, and we could go really deep into this scope level because I was thinking to myself, the scope. The first thing that occurred to me, guys, was AI. And I don't know if anybody's used the AI for scope stuff, but it's incredible. You can build a custom GPT, takes you a few minutes. You can take the scopes, you can analyze them, break them apart. You can show your team how to do it, and you can go really deep into that. I've got pages full of notes here, Adrian, about different ideas. I heard someone talking about the pricing catalogs and guidelines. That was industry standard. You negotiate, get all your pricing agreed upon, and there's an agreed upon pricing catalog. So, I mean, there's so many different, yeah. Go ahead.
MSAs. Have those
Yeah.
MSAs already in place.
Yep. Having emergency contacts. He was talking about that as well. That's an important thing. When those fires happen, the plumbing backups happen. That's critical. And I think you were talking about the difference in pricing. And I'll give you a great example. We were doing turnkey on one of my properties, and the local vendors. It was 3 times more expensive than the vendors I brought from Atlanta. And they did not meet the compliance depot requirements, but they met my general contractor requirements. So I just, well, I'll just put them under me. So that type of differential, the middlemen are marking it up, and it's so funny. We're shooting ourselves in the foot for this compliance stuff because the differential in price. You could go to the actual small guy and say, "Hey, look, let's get you insurance so I can get you on the property," and then you can do other people. And then part of that's educating them. And they don't know how to do that. You got to get them with the right. I've done that as well. I've taken them and said, okay, let's take you to this insurance broker I know. We're going to get you the unemployment insurance, the workers' comp insurance, all the stuff you need so that you can come on my property and work. And the saving differential, even if I have to pay them more, a surcharge, it's still huge difference. So, but that's, you have to dig into the details to see that. But anyway, there's a lot of interesting takes here, and you've got a lot of experts in here, Adrian. But I would definitely say this: the struggle people are feeling right now is we are feeling the pressures from deals bought in 21, 22 with bad debt structures now. And only in hindsight they look bad. Yep. And it's painful. If you're in the ownership group, you're trying to squeeze everything. And any little bump, it hurts, and you're feeling it, and you're looking at that bottom line, and you're saying, uh-oh, I got to do something quick here.
Can always right on and on point. Mike Henry, I'm not sure if you ever been to our meeting before our meetings, but I'll love for you to say a few words on a topic and maybe introduce yourself to the group.
Sure. Hi, my name is Mike Henry. I'm a regional maintenance manager for Greystar. I work in the LA area, and this is my first time here. I was invited via LinkedIn, so just want to say hi to everyone. Regarding the vendor struggle, Greystar requires our vendors to be a net vendor. So I don't know if anybody's heard of net vendor.
Oh yeah.
They're like a third-party company that collects all the insurance certificates, all the licenses. They make sure it's up to date, and when it's not, it shows that they're not up to date. So anytime you schedule a vendor to be on site, you get on NetVendor, make sure that they're all up to date, that they've turned in all their insurances, and NetVendor takes care of it all. So it kind of takes, the struggle of the property of the on-site team trying to handle that. That's how it used to be like 10 years ago. You had this book, and at the first of each month, you would look to see, oh, whose insurance is expiring. Then you'd have to call the company and say, hey, your insurance is out of date. But now a net vendor takes care of all that. There's like $110 yearly fee that the vendor pays. But, I've gotten some small mom and pop companies in, and they kind of complained about the $110. And I said, well, just throw it on the first bill. Throw it on the first invoice you send me. We're more than happy to pay it, because they still come in at a much, much better rate than like these other bigger companies. When you have these bigger companies, you have a lot of overhead. They have more management they have to pay, more office space, warehouse space. So sometimes you get these mom and pops, and you can really save some money that way. I guess that's it from me. Thank you.
Yeah, well, glad to have you on, and hopefully you'll be able to come back. You'll find us interesting enough, right? What we do out here.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I got stuck in a meeting. So
it's all good. We all understand. You come, you stay for as long as you can. I want to make sure that we get to everyone around the table. We still have Vinny. Yeah, Vinny, you haven't been on yet, and also Ed. I know that you've been on and off. If you're available after Vinny, I'd like to hear your take.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ken. Thanks, Adrian, for having him in the group. It's nice to have that perspective from the ownership side and somebody who really has been through a lot of it. I have a question for you, Ken. I'm not going to hold you to it or anything. I'm just going to throw it out there, because I often think of this question when I was in the room with asset managers or ownership groups. Before you even come to the table for like some capital projects or something, what part of your mind is already made up before you get there? Because sometimes I really honestly felt like there was nothing that I was going to do to get that job done. And I'm just curious, is that like a real thing? Because we feel it on the other side.
Yeah, I think it is a real thing. Unfortunately, we are constrained by our budgets. And there's really two times when you buy a deal, you can set your capital dollars in rehab renovations, and then you have this replacement reserve that you can tap. But a lot of times the replacement reserve is limited what you can actually draw upon it. And
Right.
one of the things we negotiate with Fannie or Freddie is what we can actually pull from those documents. So if there was some AC, for example, there may be a cap on what we can actually pull, and that's a real constraint. So then it's a matter of allocating cash flow and understanding what our distributions to our investors are going to be and trying to allocate it. But I think the biggest thing I would say to you is it really depends on the context. So if it's a roof leak and we have to fix the roof leak, I'm probably going to say, hey, can we patch it? Can we patch it? The same thing with
Right.
ACs. Can we patch it? Can we patch it?
Yeah.
But there is a point, like I had this the other day that came up with a fire panel, $28,000 fire panel. I was devastated. It was a small little panel, and we got multiple bids, and I wanted to fix it so badly, but the risk of
Fire
some
life
sort-
safety.
yeah, I had to
Certain
$28,000.
things, yeah.
Boom. Yeah. So that's a great example where I didn't want to do it, but I had no choice. I have to do it. So there are some things that are just constrained. It wasn't in the budget. It just hit us, and that's just part of it.
Yeah. And it depends on, and that's the other thing, is you guys have more of intimate details as far as how long your hold is. If you're doing value add, you know what your hold period is generally, and what the market's gonna, it's gonna fluctuate in and out of there. But the best time, you got to hit all those numbers at the right time. So,
Yeah.
and I know sometimes you get hit something at the end. You're like, well, we're putting this thing in the market, and if we could just patch it and get on and leave something for the next guy. I've heard that a million times.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah. But the other thing I was going to say for Tyus, is I'm in a very similar situation. So I feel your pain. I can hear it in your voice, and I'm sure everybody here knows when I talk about it. I speak from the heart, and I speak very passionately about this industry that I'm in, that we're all in. And there's ups and downs throughout throughout your career, and you just got to hang in there. That's all I can tell you is just know that you're doing the best you can. And it's really difficult when you know what it takes, and then the people above you are the ones that make those decisions. Now tie that into what Guillermo was saying. Some of us aren't actually the decision makers. We only start the process for the decision making, and we hope that they tap back into us when it comes down to why do we really need this done? Not just give me the numbers and then we're going to run them, and then we're going to say, okay, they prioritize it as far as their needs are. And that's another perspective because they're looking at it from the other side. I get it. But sometimes, if they don't have those boots on the ground, or like you said, most asset managers have never been in any way, shape, or form. They're mostly financial guys. A lot of them are. And I dealt with companies, JP Morgan and those ones. So I know how that goes. And trying to speak their language, like we were asking, how do we get a point across to them? It always has to be money and numbers. That's the only way. They don't know the actuality of our real world when we're in it. They're not here. They come down, they visit once or twice a year, like you said. We take them to the nicest units. We make sure all the grounds are done as perfect as it can be. And they think every day just goes like that.
Right.
We all know that that's not reality.
There's one way I've been trying to talk to him about it recently, though, that's kind of helped. You have 4 good years, 4 positive profit years each year. You're just making more and more and more. It is completely understandable if you've been in any market structure or studied anything about stocks or anything. 4 good years, you're gonna have a bad one.
Yeah.
But it will bounce back. You just don't
Well, then
look
you
to
have
blame
also the
somebody.
comparison of year over year, right? We're still working off of the COVID years where the numbers were through the freaking roof for this industry. So, I mean, you can't compare. You can't go. You're going to have to go back 4 years, calendar years, to really find something comparable. But now you're 4 years later, and it doesn't jive either, right? The stats don't add up. I get into all this stuff myself because I take an interest in it. And the other thing I was going to say was I don't know who was asking about it, but about how do we and how do we enforce our scopes and try and reinforce what a scope is to everybody? That has to happen from the regional position for maintenance down to the property service manager, down to the technicians, because everybody should have an understanding of what a scope is. I can't tell you how many maintenance technicians I've hired and told them that, the scope of the work that we're going to do. And they've never heard that word before. Someone who's been in the industry for 10, 15, 20 years, they don't want to ever be past a maintenance technician or a lead technician, but they still should have a general understanding. I don't think that the knowledge base goes down that far. I don't think we track far enough down in order to get these people in line to have a full understanding. Because when I would leave a property, I knew who I could leave in charge. Okay. If my lead wasn't there, I had another guy. But I know they all have a full understanding of almost everything that I know. And they might add something else because they see it from a different perspective, because now they're coming in and they're newer and fresher. Eyes on things is different perspective. But yeah, we have to teach the scopes all the way down. And I think a lot of the times when we do, especially because, Ken, I was in value add for 4 years, actually 6 years. So I went and built scopes myself. And a lot of the times the regional, the VP of construction and capital goes down to the property level and just looks at things, doesn't tie in with the supervisor, ties in with the property manager very, very rarely, just to tell them what they're doing. But nobody has a full understanding of what the scope is. So then we had the renovation team come, and then we say, well, then the VP comes back and he would send me and say, go check it over. And I'm like, why is this like this and this like this and this like that? And the supervisor says, nobody told me anything. The property manager says, nobody told me anything. I just knew there was guys coming here to do a renovation. So we should really have that scope brought all the way down so that every single person on that property understands what's going to be going on. I know there are time constraints and everything else that we can throw at it to make an excuse. But if we want to get it right and we want to really be efficient and we want to be taken seriously and want to be acknowledged, everybody has to do their part. And I think that a lot of the times those other people and even us, I'll admit it, we miss it sometimes, right? because you get tied up with other things, and I get it, but I think it has to be done more thoroughly. It has to be done like you have to be consistent with it. And that's the main thing with when you're building a scope and you want to get everybody on the same page and on board, you really should have the meeting with the whole property, that VP of construction, if you have a regional construction and a regional maintenance person, have them all there. If it takes a day, it takes a day. The property's not going to go down in a day. You take that day, you take everybody, you walk the unit, you say, this layout, we're going to do this. This floor plan, we're doing that. This floor plan, we're doing this. Then everybody will have an understanding, and then from there you go on. And then if there's a mistake, we fix it. But you don't have to go all the way back up the chain now to the VP of construction. Why is this faucet not matte black and that's brushed nickel? We weren't getting brushed nickel. Well, they didn't even know that. You know what I'm saying? So that's the couple things I have to add today.
I always say that the only thing certain about communication is the illusion that it's taken place.
Right.
That's a great quote. Vinny, I know that you and I have been trying to connect, so on a one-on-one basis, let's get back on track and do that one-on-one. And we have Ed. We still haven't gotten to Ed yet.
Yep.
Mr. Ed.
Hello, everyone. I do agree with the last fantastic gentleman just said, word for word. He had me running around the office. He is preaching today, everybody. So I actually turned it up so everybody can listen. But he took the words right out of my mouth. I have nothing to say. I loved it. From start to finish about scope and just understanding and teaching and he brought tears to my eyes. I literally run around my office screaming, he's preaching. Listen, that's all I have to say. I have nothing to say. You can't even follow behind that. Great job.
Thank you.
Great job. Oh my goodness.
Gentlemen, as we're up on time, a real pleasure as always. Thank you for all of you that just joined us for the first time. I hope to see you back on calls. We're gonna come up with more interesting topics, more great speakers here. Want to make this like very, very productive, very useful for everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And
hey, Adrian, before we call it quits real quick, can I just throw? So, how many of you have done a training with your site teams of how to actually write a scope of work? Right? We all talk about this scope, but what I find most of the time is nobody knows how to really write a scope. And then what happens is things get missed in the scope. And then we want to refer back to the scope when to get your quotes apples to apples, oranges to oranges, you got to have a solid scope. And your scope should be how the contractor is bidding the job. All too often I have found on sites where we leave up to the contractor to come out and tell us, we say, oh, we want this done, but we leave it to them to say how they're going to do it, as opposed to us giving them the scope of work and then them bidding it accordingly. Once we develop the scope and they bid it, at that point, we select the contract for the quote that we want work done. And that's what we should be monitoring from that point forward to make certain that they're doing what they were contractually obligated to do. Any of you that are interested, we did a training not long ago where it's AI generated. It will teach them how to go about writing a scope of work and outlining a scope of work. If any of you are interested in that, feel free to reach out to my email and I will forward that information over to you.
Thank you, Dwayne. That was a great way to wrap up the conversation. You took the words out of my mouth with AI. AI could do like a lot of amazing things when it comes to scope, from creating to improving to bid comparison. And it's actually super easy and it's free. Literally, if you have ChatGPT, it could do it for you for free, right? So thank you for that. I think it's a great reminder, even for those that weren't on a call today, as that being a resource or to reach out to you for that particular training. Thank you all once again. I look forward to see you all back in a couple of weeks. We're gonna pick another great conversation topic. If you have your own topic that you really want to have, here brought up, just shoot me an email. Shoot me an email. I'll make sure that we get it on. Okay. take care. Have an amazing week. Okay, take care.
Appreciate it.
Have a good one, guys.